This is the Media Police Post from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this show, we police the state of truth in the Republic. And because truth is communicated to us by journalists and analysts, we have made it our civic duty to put it to the test. We advance from two confirmed truths about the media. One, and in the words of Roger Stone, the media is either lazy or evil. And for the most part, they are both evil and lazy. That is why the truth, their truth, must be put to a test. Two, another confirmed truth is that journalism is verified gossip. In fact, what is presented to us as news analysis is gossip that has been verified by journalists. This gossip has to be ground-truthed. We will monitor columnists, we will assess the state of truth in what they submit to the Republic, and we will pass verdict on what is true and what is not. For the record, we are not journalists. We are thinkers. We are not lazy or evil, and we do not verify gossip. What we give you is the truth that sets you free. On today's show, we will discuss either our favorite columns of last week or columns which reflect unformed and uninformed opinions and columns that made you stupid. These are columns that fell into the cognitive trap of we see things as we are, not as they are, or that are based on conjuncture history. And lastly, there are columns that smack of envelope journalism. Welcome GK and CS. What will we be reviewing today?
Thank you. Asante. There was a piece in The Nation that argued that the president should heed the Chief Justice's call and appoint the 6 left-out judges. The article argues that the president's role is simply a ceremonial one, and it is an argument that has been repeated quite a number of times. If this argument is to hold, the question that arises is this: if the role is a ceremonial one, why is it there in the first place? Why is it necessary to have the president perform and engage in such ceremony? What does it achieve? I submit that part of the problem is the fact that there are different schools of interpreting the Constitution, which therefore affects how we then perceive and understand executive authority. Yeah. Under the classical way that we understand separation of powers, of government comprising 3 limbs, that is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, it is usually relatively easier to draw clear lines as to what the roles of the legislature and the judiciary are. One is charged with making laws, and the other one interpretation and adjudication. When it comes to delineating the executive, it becomes more difficult to be as precise about what the function of execution entails. To quote one constitutional law scholar, Professor Ben Obi Nwabuze, he wrote that executive power is indeed a term of uncertain meaning, and further that perhaps no other term in the science of government is so much taken for granted and yet so difficult to precisely delineate. He proceeds to ask 2 questions. Firstly, does executive power embrace all functions that are neither legislative nor judicial? And secondly, can executive power be exercised independently of a law, a statute, a constitutional provision, or any other written law? In order to begin to answer such questions, we need to begin with some classical theories which give us 3 different schools of interpretation, specifically with respect to the nature, reach, and limits of executive authority. The 3 are the residual power theory, the inherent power theory, and the specific grant theory. The residual power theory takes the view that executive authority embraces every power that is by nature neither legislative nor judicial, hence the word residual. The residual power theory therefore sees this executive power very broadly. The second theory is the inherent power theory. It argues that executive power gives the president an inherent authority to exercise any function that is inherently executive in nature, and this does not need to be limited in every action or every case to what is prescribed in written laws. Finally, the most restrictive theory is the specific grant theory, or the enumerated power theory, which limits the president only to what is written. As we gradually over time unpack and better understand what is still a young constitution, if we confine our views of some of the president's actions only to the specific grant theory, for example, it becomes very easy to come to harsh conclusions and even to say that the president has ceremonial roles. But if we take a broader view, especially in light of the fact that the Constitution requires that we read it as a whole, and in light of the fact that the president is both head of state and government, we can then appreciate that a measure of executive discretion can be exercised in light of a broader understanding of executive authority. We can see the need for such instances where executive discretion is necessary in order to serve the greater good, especially if he has access to intelligence which would make him deem it necessary to have a broader view of executive power.
I do like that understanding of executive authority and the three ways of looking at it. I think I would go with a broader way rather than the restrictive one. Yeah. This week I'd like to make a comment on an article in The Star titled "What All This Talk About Activist Judges" by Jill Cottrell-Guy. In her article, Jill Cottrell makes reference to comments in the newspapers on judicial activism. She says that on reading the definitions of judicial activism, one would get a sense that being an activist judge was a bad thing. And on this panel, we have argued strongly against judicial activism. But in this article, Jill Cottrell not only argues that judicial activism is a good thing, she quotes the Indian academic Upendra Baxi in support of her argument. Upendra Baxi makes a distinction between what he called activist judges and active judges. And this is where Mrs. Guy attempts to hoodwink us. Her article only gives us Upendra Baxi's definition of an active judge, but not his definition of an activist judge. What she wants us is for us to believe that our judiciary fits a definition of good activism that only she knows. So allow me to lift the veil of ignorance that she's attempting to place us under. According to Baxi, an active judge tends to support the status quo and the government in power. But an activist judge conscientiously does not look for legitimation from the holders of executive or economic power, but rather looks to social legitimation from the deprived, the disadvantaged, and the dispossessed groups of society. And according to Baxi, it is the articulation of the grounds of this conscientious choice that enables one to distinguish mere judicial adventurism from authentic judicial activism. And that is the question that this article did not in the end answer. Is the Kenyan judiciary authentically activist or merely adventurous? Is it truly acting in the interests of the deprived, the disadvantaged, and dispossessed Kenyans? I don't know. You answer for yourself. But I will end with a quote by Carl Llewellyn, if I said that correctly, the founder of American legal realism, who said, "Do not look at what judges say, but look at what they do with what they say." And this quote was also favored by her author, Upendra Baxi. He added the following words: "Judges often do what they do not say, and often too they say what they actually don't do." So some judges are juristically active, not judicially. That is, they deploy reasoning in the hope that it speaks to the future, which does not apply to the present.
And surely it should apply to the present. The
Exactly.
present needs of the country. So I moved to politics. Today my thoughts were inspired by the Standard's headline. It said, "Handshake goodies split Raila allies." That the mega projects unleashed in Nyanza by the president last week have put Raila's partners in NASA, that is Mudavadi, Kalonzo and Wetangula, under pressure to deliver the presidency so that their region can also benefit. So this is President Kenyatta classically using political economy at its best. That is, using methodology of economics to make decisions on politics. You see, with the handshake, Uhuru helped Raila achieve utility maximization, the concept that individuals and firms seek to get the highest satisfaction from their economic decisions. So by shaking hands politically, Luo Nyanza benefited economically. So if the bearded sisters are indeed under pressure to deliver a presidency for their respective regions, perhaps they ought to consider a strategy that will give each of their regions the highest payoff. So in political economy, this is the concept of forming a minimal winning coalition. In it, a rational politician tries to form a coalition that is as large as necessary to win, but not larger than it needs to be. This means that the strategy that the One Kenya Alliance has to increase its coalition can be futile without an anchor tenant. And by anchor tenant, I mean Baba Man. This is because historically, through the elections, Baba's voting bloc has stayed intact. Raila is the ultimate coalition member to have. Joining his coalition strengthens any one of Mudavadi or Kalonzo's bargaining positions in the political negotiation. In addition, any new coalition must also be in touch with the preferences on the ground, with the Mwananchi. Under real conditions, you must recognize rational voters will vote for a party that maximizes their utility. So a rational voter will not want to waste their vote. So which coalition will offer this safest bet? So in the next few months, as political strategy unfolds, 3 things will probably be observed or should be observed. 1, a good coalition will identify the freeloaders quickly and get rid of them. So if in the Kenya One Alliance, if Gideon is not bringing in votes or Wetangula, figure it out. Should BBI not come to pass, what will be the other ways to offer incentives? If politics is about interests. And 3, we should be very wary of political loners, the people who seem power hungry, those who encourage groupthink and work only within closed circles. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about.
I think we all know Bob will not name any names. So thank you for watching and joining us today on the Media Police Posts. Columnists, we've put you on notice. Join us again next week.
Thank you.